Hi everyone, I welcome you all to our tech podcast series. And today I am back with yet another podcast. I'm Chavi, your podcaster of the day. And now you might be thinking that how we are going to talk about the digital assets and lending, and who is our amazing and special guest of the day. So, to cover up with amazing finance knowledge, today we have our expert Shreyansh with us, who is the co-founder and CEO at Finsire. So, with that note, I would be very happy to welcome Shreyansh to our tech podcast series. How are you doing, Shreyansh?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
That's amazing. So, before starting up with my questions and a lot of up and down things, I would be very happy to know that how you started your journey, and would love to know a brief about Finsire as well.
Sure. So Finsire is something that is obviously not new to me, right? What we do at Finsire actually is something that I've seen as I've grown up. Very interesting backstory actually of this is where I come from. My granddad, post independence, he's a farmer. When he started off, he actually found little to nothing in terms of kind of credit agencies when he actually started off. Which is what what he did was when he moved from the small village called Haryana in Rajasthan to Chennai. He started a small pawnbroking shop. Right, pawnbroking is the most informal, rustic form of lenders that this country has produced, and much of the learnings actually are from that pawnbroking that was started in 1952, still running very strong. And essentially, what he used to do was collateral based lending. But the collateral that he did was obviously hard assets, much like what they do in terms of, say, gold, land, or agri products or agri land, so on and so forth, the vehicle also. And when I realized that there was no space for me to enter the family business because much of my uncles had already got into the business, and I'd seen the cycle of this. I realized I had to do something by myself, which is why I went kind of overseas. Did a bunch of gigs in Hong Kong, Singapore, the US. Worked very closely with folks at Wall Street. Worked at Wall Street. Came back to India, knocked kind of at doors at to my dear friends who I know for about 20 years, Mridul and Subramaniam, and we pretty much started Finsire. Our essential thesis is that we ideally would want to build this lending infrastructure of secured assets for India. It's a long shot, but ideally, secured assets is what pushes the economy. Is what value terms is that is what is probably even 75-80% of all the lending that takes place in the economy. Our thesis is that every asset eventually would get digitized, and one user or consumer should get this secured lending at ease of unsecured lending that they get today. And essentially, that is less of paperwork, less of kind of applications that go in, and more of APIs that eventually get integrated with these depositories, asset originators, lenders, and the end consumer where they can take credit from. Right, so that's how it began. I mean, we still have a long way to go, but I do believe that eventually all these assets at scale at which they would probably get digitized, we'd want to kind of master this and provide to the end consumers as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly. That was really great to hear that. And now moving with that, would love to know that how does Finsire's technology enables banks, NBFCs, and fintech companies to maximize their lending capabilities?
The way we think of lending, right? Traditionally, obviously, when you think of lending, it's not the usually when you speak to lenders, they'll probably say we have these number of loans that we've given out, these number of assets that they have on board, um, you know, uh, or they have these many number of customers out there, so on and so forth. I mean, having been in the industry for some time and having realized that and any lender you probably speak to, the most important factor for a lender is actually risk, right? Risk is the most sought out after sort of a phenomena, that lenders look out for. Lesser the risk, better for them, because their cost of capital will always be lower, right? Cost of capital is the rate at which they get the money from, right? So on one end of it is the lenders. On the other end of it is these asset originators, because every asset has its own asset originator or depository that essentially kind of holds these assets for the end consumer. These are very important. Every asset actually has a different asset originator and depository. I mean, that's the most challenging part of it, right? When you think of it, there are about easily 16 assets that potentially users or consumers can hold across hard and digital assets. Every asset has a different asset originator. Or something like a land actually has even more deeper sense, because every kind of state will have a different kind of registrar, so on and so forth, right? So how do you even digitize that at a large scale, right? So that's the longest shot that we probably think of. But today, we're glad that, say, something like stocks, mutual funds, or life insurance, we know the asset originators, and there's a single entity out there for it, right? So that's the second part of it, right? Like getting the asset originators on board and getting them to integrate, and getting them to pledge, depledge that particular asset at scale. The last and final foremost thing is that, look, there are many ways to give this out. Either you can probably go direct to the consumer, give it a B2C, or direct, or you can leverage it out to other players who already hold distribution or already hold end entities, and directly integrate with them and solve various use cases for these end entities. And we've taken the latter approach, right? The reason being that we find it a lot more kind of comfortable at the end of the day, integrating and solving a lot more problems for the end consumers who already have distribution, than directly kind of scaling at them. So what Finsire actually does is marrying these three, right? These lenders, the asset originators, and the end distribution providers, who might be fintech, might not be fintech, but essentially kind of marrying these three, and provide, essentially being the tech tubes for these three, for someone to pledge and get credit on that. There's a very interesting anecdote I think of, right? It is not the clothes that you wear at the end of the day that justifies it, but the soul that justifies it, right? Finsire essentially is the tech tubes of the soul that I essentially would like to integrate for all these players, that eventually kind of enables them to lend on these assets.
Got it. That was great to hear that. And in your point of views, when we talk about digital assets and lending, what is the future? And according to you, how finance would be like shaping in the future?
I mean, the beauty of finance is that as more and more digitalization that takes place, obviously, right? Everything is just an API, right? I mean, you the fact that you can order food with a click of a button is an API that goes to the end entity. The fact that you can send money is an API that goes from one bank to another bank is actually an API call and push. The fact that you can probably click a button and get a loan is an API. So at the end of the day, I think the future of all of this actually is the fact that as and when more and more assets out there eventually are there to get digitized at ease, it's an API push or a pull that happens with these asset originators, right? So you got to think of, if unsecured loan could be so easy out there in the economy, and lenders could obviously charge exuberant rates for it, 15, 16, 20%. Those are always those small ticket loans that are given out. How do we do it for large sizes of loan, and eventually those interest rates and the loan durations actually should be in the borrower's court and not the lender's court, right? The lender should not probably at the end of the day tell you that I'm going to charge you this much, I'm going to give you only for this duration. At the end of the day, my end thesis is that if I own these many number of assets, why can't I just pledge that if there is an underwriter, an asset originator, and directly get credit on that at ease, right? And that's an API push or a pull that will probably take place for almost all of these assets, right? So that's the end thesis. I see finance eventually for lending, right? There is one phase of it that obviously they do believe that credit cards is obviously very beautiful. Yes, it is, and you would also find how Finsire actually enables a lot of these credit card players also at the end of the day, because of these assets that they hold, but they cannot get the credit card just because of a criteria called credit score or income of sorts, and that is stopping them. It's at the end of the day, it is multiple APIs going together, and the end consumer kind of getting leverage out of it based on the assets of he or she holds.
That was really great to hear that. And when we talk about the finance, like, and especially right now, since everything is digital and we are talking about the digital assets, there's one thing, the major issue that comes is security. So, in your point of view, how like one can work on the security part of finance and especially the digital assets?
I mean, so that's what we do, right? Like, so at the end of the day, security is what is a function of risk, right? And finance is a game of risk. I mean, as someone who's only lived and done risk 80% of my professional career, I probably realized that risk is obviously something that is what lenders think on the top of the books, right? If I have an asset where I can collateralize it, I might not even have to do a lot of your you know unnecessary proofs and checks that usually unsecured loans do. I don't have to sit down and track you and take your information on an application like most of the applications out there in the ecosystem do. That's the beauty of pledging a collateral that is just lying in my broker's end and not doing anything. Right? Think of that one mutual fund SIP that people have been doing it for month on month for like 5 years, and that's just lying, and it's a dead asset at the broker's end, right? Not doing anything but just acting as an appreciating tool. Think of a life insurance that our parents would have bought for us 10 years plan and just adding to the life insurance and not doing anything, right? That's just an appreciating tool as well. How can you actually leverage those tools or those assets and eventually kind of use it at your own scale or ease? So that is where we think of security plays a role, right? If you are pretty much if you can pay your credit that you've taken, and if you have an asset that you can pledge, I mean, I'm sure three things should come in your way. One is the loan to value of a particular asset, that should be a lot higher because you've pledged. One is the interest rate, that should be a lot lower regardless of the asset that you might hold. You might not even need an unsecured loan. You might just directly kind of pledge it through an API, repay that, and then kind of get credit on that. And the last one is the loan duration, right? So the loan duration is a very interesting thing. Most of the unsecured obviously do have, say, somewhere about 6 months, 12 months, or whatever, 24 months loan. uh, but is there a thing in the ecosystem today, which is obviously it is not there, which is what Finsire obviously wants to do, is that everything, all the loans that are out there do have a certain timeline and a duration, right? It is only certain groups of institutions out there that actually have loan durations, or countries, right, have loans that pretty much go on until perpetuity, 10, 20, 30 years or so. So when you think of it, is there any instrument out there that allows me for a lot more higher duration for a perpetuity, even for buying a car of sorts, or buying a house? Buying a house allows us to do that, so on and so forth. So is there something like that? There are very few actually. So the core thesis is that if I can pledge my mutual funds or my insurance, which actually has a maturity of say even 10, 15 years or so, I can pretty much take my loan duration even for that long, right? Because I'm not liquidating it at all, right? So at the end of the day, our thesis is that can we increase the loan duration itself for perpetuity for the longest, for any particular credit that they take, and change the whole thesis of credit, right? I'm sure end users wouldn't like to, kind of pay higher EMIs month on month, so on and so forth. So that there are two things here, right? Pay high EMIs month on month, and the loan duration becomes smaller, or pay low EMIs month on month, and the loan duration becomes obviously longer and the interest rates a lot higher, so on and so forth. Is there anything where both is low, right? Where interest rate is also low, your loan duration is also pretty high, and out there that can only happen with some sort of an asset that has a maturity of a longer duration.
That was really insightful, I would say. And while we were talking about these security reasons, according to you, what are some of the biggest challenges and the opportunities that we can understand and see in the digital assets and in the lending space, especially right now?
I mean, so the challenges, of course, is that as and when you build more and more assets, as and when you kind of think of more and more assets that come in the ecosystem, uh, it has to get digitized, right? So that is obviously a challenge, right? Tomorrow, when you think of you know, and being as ambitious, you'd probably think, why can't a PF be digitized, right? There are a bunch of people in the country. Why can't that be digitized? I mean, that's an obvious case that involves a lot of lobbying. Why can't something like other life insurance companies? There are very few actually are digitized. Other life insurance companies get digitized so that loan against that becomes a lot more seamless. Today, life insurance probably takes somewhere about 11 to 15 days to get the credit out there. So, I mean, and majority of the masses actually own life insurance still in India, right? 6.5% of the $10 trillion assets that Indians hold actually is life insurance. So something like that is a big challenge that obviously we would kind of participate to solve at scale, with the help of these regulators, with the help of asset originators, depositories, and life insurance companies in the coming few kind of quarters of sorts, right? Yeah, I mean, these are the main things, because there's a very interesting saying, right? India is a land of assets, but scarce of liquidity, and that's very true, right? So we have to kind of pledge out these assets and try to give as much liquidity as possible.
So, while we are talking about these things, according to you, I also wanted to understand one thing, that right now people are just working on some any or the other digital asset marketplace or some or the other thing. People are not actually following the right thing. That they are like, okay, let's make some finance startup. Let's start with these things. What are your points in that? Like, do you really like in your point of view, are people just blindly going with the trends? Are they actually understanding finance, if I talk about precisely about India?
I mean, if you ask me 10 years ago, probably say people don't know. If you ask me 10 years later, you'd probably tell 10 years ago people don't know. I mean, it's a learning curve, right? As young, you'd find Indians, a lot more of them do learn. So, I mean, the fact that they understand a lot, and it's a growing curve for sure. You'll probably find a lot more people entering markets. So it did happen, right? So post COVID, a lot of people entered the markets. Some understood, some didn't, but it's a good learning curve. You only understand the markets or investing, if you have some skin in the game, and probably if you would have lost money. When I started, I obviously 10 years ago, um, when I was 17. I mean, I still lost money while trading. So essentially, you do learn a lot, and you don't make those mistakes again. And that's the same case with lending as well, right? You start building a credit score once you take a loan, and only you learn from there. And then how you fight for getting a better interest rate, what all you can do, or various other things, that loan durations or an LTV of sorts, get a better kind of choice for yourself. At the end of the day, I mean, you have to participate. I think the younger you are, you'll probably be more prone to participating than as you grow older. Uh, and India is supremely young as a country, so I mean, a lot more will participate.
Yeah, that was really great to hear that. And what would be the best advices that you would be very happy to provide to the individuals and the businesses who are actually looking to enter into this digital assets and lending market?
I mean, the advice is, of course, take Finsire's rails. I mean, you probably have the best. So essentially, what you have, if you want to ever kind of, if you have assets, and if you ever think that you'll have to want to pledge it and take credit on it, we'll be more than happy to kind of integrate with you. That's the foremost advice. But ideally, it is this is a space where it allows a lot of high ticket lending to take place in a very transparent way, for the lenders as well as for the end consumer, so that tomorrow I do not need to take all of your documentation and provide you credit, but rather can just pledge if certain asset is actually holding back at the disposal of entity, right? uh, so and the last point is, of course, to realize that as working capital becomes essential for end consumers, and say businesses of sorts, it is only fair to those lenders out there also to give you the best deal if you can place something on the table, right? Otherwise, you probably always find these exuberant amounts of unrealistic terms and conditions that are put upon you. So the best, of course, face is if you can provide that to the end lender, and the end lender kind of essentially provides it to you. And as Finn said, we'd be more than happy to kind of integrate and scale it up for your business.
That was amazing. And before concluding this podcast, I would be very happy to know some of your future plans that you are planning for Finsire.
I mean, you're very young, so I mean, future plan essentially is that as we grow more into the business, of course, is to take care and ensure that we start collateralizing or pledging more and more assets. Right? It's a no-brainer that India has about $10 trillion worth of assets. Today, what can be digitized probably 2 trillion or less. It's a very humongous task that how essentially for the end consumer to begin with can we unlock this value. Probably even globally, HNIs have a lot of these assets locked up, as well as a lot of these Indians consumers today have a lot of these assets locked up. Is there a way that globally can I can maximize the end potential for these users to kind of take credit on that? That becomes a very challenging task. So our end thesis is that we should be able to kind of unlock that total value for them, and then scale it up of sorts. So that's the future that we obviously want to do, and give it at ease to all the businesses that essentially have this digital touch points where they can kind of get credit at.
That was amazing. Thanks a lot, Shreyansh, for sharing such an amazing and great insights on the finance, digital assets, and lending. And I'm pretty much sure the listeners would also be loving that. And I have also dropped Shreyansh's socials in the description below. Do check them out and don't forget to connect with him. And he has some great knowledge, so it's going to be very much amazing for you as well. With that note, thank you so much, Raj, for joining in for this today's podcast. I really loved hosting it.
Thank you so much.